America's daring, highly trained Special Mission Force. Its purpose, to defend human freedom against Cobra.
Hey, this is Justin back from Books, Bricks, and Boards. Taking a little bit more of a break from my Pathfinder 2e content, but there's more of that coming. I still have a lot to talk about with the Lost Omens World books. Also, eventually, Beetle and Grimm is going to get the Absalom box set sent out, and I'll be talking about that when I get my copy in. But today, I thought I would talk about something I received in the mail on Friday, which was my pre-order copy of the G.I. Joe role-playing game. And to give you a little bit of background, I am a child of the 80s, was into all of the classic 80s animation that was consumable for us on those Saturday morning cartoons. So, Thundercats, Silverhawks, He-Man, all of these things were a great part of my entertainment diet as a young man. But none of them were more a key component to that than G.I. Joe. So, as I love everything 80s, and if you were to walk through my house, you would see arcade cabinets from the 80s and Back to the Future memorabilia and Ghostbusters memorabilia and 1989 Batman memorabilia, because I just love everything 80s that brings me back to my childhood. So whenever I heard that Renegade Games was going to be releasing some RPGs based on some of my favorite IPs, particularly G.I. Joe, but also Transformers, I thought, well, this is something that I need to check out, if for nothing else than for nostalgia factor. But I know that typically IP-related materials have a very narrow target audience in the RPG world. And as I sit on a stack of those types of projects, from the Princess Bride RPG, the Army of Darkness RPG, and many others, I just wondered, what is there going to be for me in this book? And we're going to talk about that today.
Don't judge people till you give them a chance.
Because there's a chance you could be wrong. Now we know.
And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!
So this is the limited edition version of the G.I. Joe core rule book. Because I bought it through Renegade Game Studios, I also received the PDF. So I have both of those available to me, and I've gone through both. And in the case of this book, I definitely feel like what Roadblock said is absolutely good advice, and that is, don't judge this book by its cover. So I was actually a little bit disappointed in the way this cover turned out, because there's just not a lot to it. And if you look at the back, it's a little bit cooler. It's got the wherever there's trouble. Of course, G.I. Joe is there. But that being said, it is nice. The construction of the book is quite nice. It's almost got like a textbook feel to it, which I'm sure is going to be very durable over the years. And it's a little bit different than what you will be able to pick up later. So I do have a copy of the standard version coming as well. But I'm going to flip through some of the sections and kind of give you an idea of what's in here. So as you open up, it starts with a little bit about what G.I. Joe is. And as you go through, you get a lot of data files. So if you're going through this book and you're looking for your favorite Joe, if you were from the 80s animated series generation, you're going to find him here. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is there are no stats for any of these, and they take up a large number of pages in the book. So You could use this to recreate some of your favorite Joes, or you could just use it as a means to create some flavor in your game and reference them, or have them playing a background role. So they do make a very coy reference to Sergeant Slaughter not being in this book here in the Now You Know section of that section of the book. It talks about what a role-playing game is, which is kind of a necessary concept in any RPG book these days. And then it gets right into character creation. Now, I will say that in my read-through of this and the Power Rangers RPG, the Essence 20 system is very much a player-focused system. And what I mean by that is they try to take a lot of the pressure off of the player, and in doing so, I think they create a little bit more difficulty for an inexperienced GM. Now, that being said, I think the system is extremely flexible and it's very easy to learn. So any GM that's had a little bit of experience is going to have no problems learning this. But I do think that it is very front-loaded on the player side of things. There's a very in-depth character creation process. You kind of choose an influence, which is what you did before you became a Joe. You choose an origin. That is what the origin is, what you did before you became a Joe. You choose a role, which is kind of like a character class. And it goes into kind of creating a group, and then some of the examples are clearly inspired by your favorite Joes. So when you get past that section, here are the roles. So there's several roles in here, and you can create, with what's in the standard core rule book, you can create pretty much any type of Joe that you would be interested in creating very easily. Flipping through here, there are some really cool rules regarding equipment. When you get to that section here, let's see, essence scores. So the system itself is very interesting. So it's a D20 system, and then you add a skill die based on your skill level with the skill in question. For example, targeting is used for shooting guns. So you'd roll a D20 plus whatever die your targeting skill is rated at. So that could be anywhere from a D2 to a D12. You add those together, you try to hit a target number. For targeting, it would be the defense that you are aiming at. For other skills, it could be a set target number for the type of action that you're trying to take. If you roll a maximum score on the skill die, not on the D20, then that is considered a critical success, and you get an extra effect. If you have a specialization in a very narrow part of a skill, you get to roll not just your skill die, but every die below it, and any die that you roll out of those skill dice that is their maximum number, a 6 on a D6, an 8 on a D8, you get a critical success. You only keep one of those to add to your D20 result to determine whether you're successful or not. But if any of them other than the D2 comes up a max number, you get a critical success. So that is the gist of the entire Essence 20 system. Of course, there are nuances. It wouldn't be an RPG if there weren't. So there were kind of some of the, what I would consider analogous to feats in D&D. They're called perks in this. You get into the weapons section, and the way that the equipment works in the G.I. Joe role-playing game is very interesting. You get a set number of items at the beginning of each mission that is relatively unchanging, and you can choose from them based on the standard equipment, or if you're qualified with a specific piece of equipment, you can use that for one of your items. And then you get a certain number of requisition attempts whereby you can try to get better equipment. And I think the standard, it says in the rule book, is like 3 attempts. And the more rare the equipment you try to attain for this particular mission, the higher you need to roll on that skill to be able to attain it. That could be vehicles, it could be armor, it could be weapons. Just a very interesting and unique system. It actually says in this, the game is not about defeating enemies and taking their loot most of the time, because you don't actually keep your equipment. It is issued per mission by the pit, which is kind of the base of operations for G.I. Joe. So there are several pages of equipment. There are also some rules for pets and drones, which were very easy to understand. And if anybody was a fan of the G.I. Joe source material, they really were probably into the vehicles. And there are several. You've got the APC, you've got the AW, the Dragonfly, which is the helicopter that Wild Bill flies. You got the Jump, you got the Killer Whale. And of course, if you're a child of the 80s like me, you remember seeing all of these as a kid. You may have had some of them. So as we flip through here, there's the Vamp. There's a section that explains how combat works. Combat is very simple and uses that same Essence 20 roll check against a particular defense number. You'll have initiative, just like in normal RPGs. There is a scaling system based on sizes that accounts for troops shooting at vehicles and vehicles shooting at troops and whatnot. Also, there is an interesting system with the number of actions you get based upon your speed. And so there is some very interesting ways that interacts with the rules. There is the dice shifting ladder. Instead of pluses and minuses to your roll, typically you will shift up or down based on difficulty or advantages. So you can shift a D8 up to a D10 or to a D12, depending on what kind of advantages you have, or down if you have some things that are hindering you. There is also rules for edges and snags. Edges are basically rolling with advantage if you're familiar with D&D, and snags are rolling with disadvantage. We're going to flip through here real quick. Lots of rules for different types of combat. There are some very basic environmental and travel rules, rules for just basic everyday activities. Then you get to the section that has some really interesting details on locations that are going to be mostly familiar to those that are interested in the source material. You've got a section on the pit, of course, which is the base of operations for the Joes. There's one for the USS Flag. If you were lucky enough to have that as a child, you will certainly remember it. If you weren't, you'll remember the one kid in town that possibly had one. And each of these little sections, and there's several of them, I think there may be like 10 or more, they have some details about the particular location, and they also provide you with some plot seeds. These can give a GM some very basic information to produce a story idea based around these locations. So gives you a very good starting point if you are going to be creating your own scenarios. Then you get into kind of the rogues gallery. So you've got Cobra Commander, Baroness, you've got Destro, and Dr. Mindbender. You've got just a huge variety, and not all of them are Cobras proper. The Dreadnoks are in here. The Crimson Guard is in here. So there's plenty to keep you busy. Now, the one that was not in here that I think everybody will be looking for if they were interested in the 1980s cartoon is Storm Shadow. Storm Shadow was always the coolest of the enemies and later became a Joe. But he is not in here. Hopefully he'll be in one of the subsequent books. There's Zartan, the leader of the Dreadnoks. But Red Ninjas. And then at the end of the book, you've got, of course, some of the Cobra vehicles. And then you've got an adventure. And it actually goes into some detail about how the adventure should work and how to incorporate existing Joes in a way that doesn't dominate the story, but still adds flavor and authenticity to your adventures. And that is the book.
Fighting won't stop it. When people disagree, sometimes they need someone who's not involved to settle things.
Johnny could he's not rooting for either team.
So do I think that the G.I. Joe RPG is going to be replacing any of the big dogs in the mainstream RPG market? Is it going to be the next Pathfinder? Is it going to be the next D&D? I don't think so. But I don't think that's the target for this RPG either. I think that what I see is a very flexible and hackable RPG system in the Essence 20 with some great respect to the IP. And it's going to appeal to anybody that has a nostalgia factor for the G.I. Joe IP, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers IP, or the Transformers IP. So I think it's going to be a very good system for one-offs because everybody is going to be at least somewhat familiar with the world and with the setting. I think it will be good for convention games and for short campaigns. That being said, I think unless you are a huge fan of the source material, you're probably not going to be replacing your favorite RPG with the G.I. Joe RPG or even the Essence 20 system as a whole. I think it does really well at focusing in on source material and playing to that. I have the Power Ranger IP RPG for the Essence 20 system as well. I never watched the Power Rangers show, and I found that it was going to be an easier way to get my kids into the RPG than going into an IP that they don't have a nostalgia factor for. So that being said, I don't think that the Essence 20 system is going to be replacing any of those favorites as of yet.
I guess I was in too big of a hurry.
Remember, anything worth doing is worth planning. If you don't plan,
You're out on a limb. Now I know.
and knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe.
So what prevents the G.I. Joe RPG from being better than what it is? I think that there's a few things that hold it back from being more than a really cool surprise, and those are pretty minimal in my estimation. So the Rogues Gallery is missing just a few key components. No Serpentor, no Storm Shadow. Could use probably some more basic grunt type enemies and probably some more examples of how to incorporate them into a balanced encounter. There is some of that in the book, but I think especially for GMs that are not comfortable with working on the fly, this is going to require a little bit more prep work and a little bit more calculation upon their part than some of the other systems they might be used to. I also think that as the price of the book is a MSRP of $55, probably a little bit more work in the proofreading would have been in order. There are not as many typographical errors and odd spacing choices as there were in the Power Rangers book. but there were still a few, and some of them were in very noticeable spots. Also, probably the balance of fluff to crunch was a little bit heavier on the fluff side than the crunch side for my taste. Now this is going to be something where your miles may vary. If you want to read the data files on maybe 80 or 90 different Joes, then you're going to be very happy here. But if you wanted to know how they would interact with the game world in any way, shape, or form, you're going to be doing some work on your own because you're going to have to create that because it's not in there. The Rogues Gallery was good. No Storm Shadow. That was a bit of a letdown. But overall, very good. The system itself is very clean. And I know some folks have expressed concerns about the way criticals work. I don't think that that's something that this RPG is trying to be too strict and tight with. I think that this is meant to be a fast-playing, very loose and story-focused RPG. And I'm fine with the way that the critical system works, and I love the way that it is going to be very easy to teach new players how to utilize the system and how to express their character's actions in it. So overall, I think that this book is just a few minor pieces away from being a really excellent RPG. And like I said, its flexibility and hackability is very much appreciated in my estimation. But what did I think of it? Well, as you probably figured out by now if you've watched this whole video, I am very much impressed with the output for this, and it gives me a lot of encouragement as to what future G.I. Joe supplements will look like, as well as what the upcoming Transformers RPG is going to be like. I found that the Essence 20 system was perfect for this type of material. It really played up the nostalgia factor, and I really found that it was a great player-focused, flexible, and very entertaining, fast-playing type of system to use for exactly this type of IP. I think that this system is going to be very well utilized in the Transformers RPG, and I think that this game is going to be really good if you are fans of the G.I. Joe intellectual property, if you like freeform, story-based, less crunchy, but still with a little bit of meat on the bones types of combat systems. And I think that you could easily use this to do any sort of modern military type scenario. If you just want a quick playing version of that, this isn't going to be a simulationist. This is going to be more of a Hollywood depiction of that. So that being said, I would wholeheartedly encourage you to look at this RPG. Unless you are looking at this as a first-time GM and you were wanting to introduce all new players to their first RPG and you've never ran an RPG before, in that case, I think that it misses the mark a little bit because it's written very well to be consumed by a player at the table once they know how the system works. I don't think that it reads particularly well for somebody that doesn't understand what to look for in an RPG to begin with. So just for example, you know, I've been playing RPGs for 40 years now, nearly, and the book started with some fluff, went right into character creation, which I know D&D does the same thing, but this went into some very in-depth character creation choices before you ever really learn anything about how the system itself works. And it didn't do a very good job of holding your hand and telling you where to look for these things, I didn't think, for a new player. Now, that being said, as an experienced GM, I actually consumed it a little bit backwards. I went and looked how the different mechanics in the game worked, kind of looked for keywords and for things that would be referenced. And then I went back and looked at the player content, and it read much better to me, because the player content references a lot of things that you don't know what they mean in game until you've read the system for, or the section for running the game. But all of that said, I would give a hearty yo-jo for the G.I. Joe RPG from Renegade Games. This has been Justin from Books, Bricks, and Boards. Good gaming, and God bless.